Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Islington Mill and the monthly podcast series about the cultural life and times of one of the UK's most beloved artist-led creative centres, Salford's Islington Mill. I am your host, The Nihilist, and I've been on a bit of a summer break, but I'm back now. I am recording this podcast at the start of August, but I'm going to backdate it to being the July episode because there's been a lot going on at Islington Mill in the last couple of months. And in what seems to be a recurring theme for this podcast series, the mill is finding itself in a bit of a transitionary period where things are changing yet again. So the Partisan Collective have left the Islington Mill club space after their lease ran out, and people have been a bit worried that the club space was going to stand empty. However, a different project that was happening in a different part of Islington Mill has decided to take over the club space, and that's what I'm going to be covering in this episode of Islington Mill. And I've spoken to the people involved in this project, including Bill Campbell, who is the founder of Islington Mill, and also Rod Connolly and Sophie B from the organisation HomoBloc, who a lot of people might know as being a massive one-day festival that happens every year in their warehouse project, one of the biggest kind of clubbing destinations in, not just in the queer calendar now it seems, but in the global clubbing calendar. And I sat down with Bill and then separately with Rod and Sophie to find out more about what the project is that is now going to be taking over the club space in the period of basically from August through till possibly the very end of this year. This project has gotten a kind of thrown together name at the moment, which is called HomoMill, which it might keep that name moving forward, but I'm going to call this episode of the podcast the HomoMill / Club Space podcast, because a lot of people are asking what's going to happen in the club space now that Partisan have gone, and hopefully this podcast will be able to explain to folks a bit about what is going to be taking place in there and the background of this project. In a nutshell, the HomoMill project is looking to use the Islington Mill club space, open it out a bit like a community centre for various different queer communities around to book it out and use it for the different projects that they want to. However, I'm going to leave it to the actual people who are involved in this project to talk about this and what the aims of the project are and how it's going to be formalised and how people can get in touch with them to ask about using the club space. Bearing in mind that this is very early days yet, there's still a lot of work to be done to get this project rolling smoothly, even though it is happening. I just wanted to make this podcast at this point in time as Partisan have just finished their lease and this whole project is very new and a lot of people are hearing about it for the first time and wondering where it's come from and what it's about. So I wanted just to speak to the people involved in the project itself directly. So the first person I spoke to is Bill Campbell, who is the founder and the owner of Islington Mill and one of the chief visionaries in the mill community and its goals and aims. I met him at Studio 409 on Thursday evening. We started the conversation by me asking Bill to explain the relationship between HomoBloc and Islington Mill and how both organisations have charitable aspects. So there is a partnership between HomoBloc and the Islington Mill. Is it the Islington Mill Foundation? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, Islington Mill Foundation is a charity that we've set up. Islington Mill, as in the studios, is a CIC, community interest company. Okay. It's similar to a charity, but it isn't run in the way a charity is run. And we set that up to do some of the more developmental work that's not based on being in a building, so not a studio rental. The studio rental is the CIC. The charity has the opportunity to do other stuff. The stuff it wants to do is to support the development of people. And people in the community and how this building relates to the community, and also develops the people that are going to run Islington Mill and our cultural life in the future. When I'm dead and buried.
Which won't be for a long time yet, I'm sure. Could you give me some practical examples of how you see that working?
Well, We are just developing the charity, so that we haven't got any projects live, so I can't point to, and is this project.
Sure.
Although the HomoBloc is a version of it, but it's kind of come about in a slightly different way. But I think, say, like, you know, who's going to run this place in the future? It's kind of, I think it's, you know, working with people in the community that are here now, how we can pass on the knowledge that we have and also pass on the support about what it means to hold spaces, what it means to, you know, open a recording studio as you've done, and make that available, because for us that's what, you know, Islington Mill or your studio within it or the club itself downstairs, whatever it is, these are community resources that are held by members of the community. And because we're a queer community, it's important these spaces are held in quite an innovative way. They're not businesses as such, they're more than that. They've got values, they've got culture about them, they've got a sense of being, they might have a creative legacy about them. And all of that means that, you know, each new generation has to reinterpret that. And often these things kind of can dissolve when the founders move on, but for something like the mill that is now set up for the next 25 years, it is definitely not going to dissolve. And so it's important that the next generation can learn from and hopefully not have as hard a time when it comes to kind of debt and fundraising and stressy stuff. But also how to kind of keep the nuance of the community alive. And to know what that means when people haven't maybe experienced it first time around.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting, because we were just talking about the younger generation that have come, that are currently here, that may not have experienced really kind of pivotal, fundamental events that shaped the cultural life of Islington Mill. But to take it back to the project with HomoBloc, you said that's not, it's come about in a different way to what you were thinking that the charity aspect would. Could you explain how it has come about?
Well, it's come about because Rod and Sophie and I have known each other over many years. You know, we've all been involved in the cultural life of the city and the nightlife in different ways. And, you know, Rod and Sophie working together on HomoBloc. And so many of the people they work with, like yourself and others, have kind of come through or are part of the kind of mill community. So it kind of makes sense that a lot of the content that is happening in HomoBloc has kind of grown up through the community, through places like the mill, not all of them, but, you know, so it was like, well, their charity partners are great charities like LGBT Foundation and others, but they tend to be in the health and well-being side of the community need and charities that exist within the community, whereas Islington Mill Foundation and what Rod and Sophie wanted to do was also to support that creative endeavour that they rely on so much to make the festival, to make HomoBloc Day Festival, you know, creative and amazing and queer and anarchic and fun and creative and all of that is because of you guys as artists. And you guys as artists having places to work out what it means to be an artist. And, you know, so they wanted to be able to support that in a way. And that's what Islington Mill Foundation does, that maybe LGBT Foundation is more like health and well-being, for example. So we're the creative partner out of their charitable partners.
How did this specific project start then?
So, you know, we were invited to be a partner, a named partner, prior to last HomoBloc. So a year ago, you know, when if you went to HomoBloc last year, you will have seen that our logo was alongside LGBT Foundations and the others, so that anybody that went to HomoBloc and donated knew their money was going to these 4 or 5 charities. There's then a period of time where those charities, where that money takes to come through, because a lot of it comes through sale of merch and stuff. And myself, Rod and Sophie have been talking about this for most of the year. But it really came down to, like, we set up a few mixers that happened here to bring people together, you know, different artists that have either worked with HomoBloc in the past, or people who wanted to work with, or people who are doing different club nights or projects or dance troupes or whatever it is they might do, and brought people into a room and just said, you know, what are the kind of things that you kind of need right now or would like to have? And people were coming back with things like mentorship or skills swap or an opportunity to try out a night, and I think this also fits with that HomoBloc is not just going to be the one day in November. It's going to have year-round stuff.
Yeah.
So, the opportunity to try out a night or to develop something is kind of coming through that.
Cool. And originally, well, the project has kind of changed a little bit of shape.
Yeah.
Can you fill me in? I don't want to put the words in your mouth. I'd rather hear you explain it about where the space is within the mill and how that's changed from when the project first started.
Well, I mean, I think I've heard Rod say that he was inspired by this space.
This space right here.
You've occupied, which was another project that came out of COVID. This was my old studio, my spiritual home, and because of COVID, all those restrictions, that's what I said. Come on, queer family, you can just use it. And let's see what comes out of it, of which dead air and...
I didn't know that. I didn't know that this was an influence on that. That's great.
Well, it was because Rod would say, Rod remembers coming up here and there's just a drum kit in the corner and, a form of band was kind of emerging, and it's kind of, if you let people just in a space with a drum kit in the corner and then whatever in the other corner and allow people to just have a mess around on it, then all kinds of new things come out, new bands, new tracks, new DJs, so I think it was about, can we create a space that's got that possibility about it. So we have a space in Islington Mill, and that was what we were originally talking about. So a lot of the first mixes happened in the second floor of Islington Mill, which is a bit more kind of carpeted and a little bit more kind of officey looking. But it is a big space that people could rehearse in, that's big enough to kind of dance in, and that, maybe a number of different people could be in at the same time and work around each other. And it was always like, how are people going to work around each other? Is it going to be just some kind of free-for-all? And there's still elements of that we need to work out. But it was just about, well, could a group of people just have access to this room and kind of come in and do their thing? And whether that's making banners or dancing or making outfits or whatever it is, how can we make that happen?
But it's not happening in that space anymore.
No, because sitting alongside that, so we've been having these conversations over the first part of 2024, and recently Partisan, who've been occupying and running the venue space at Islington Mill, the historic venue space on the ground floor, have come to the decision to not continue to run the club.
Okay.
I know that they were having kind of discussions about that and various challenges that's for them to talk about. But they gave us their notice at the beginning of July. That means literally today is the 1st of August. And they gave us their month's notice, so they've handed the keys back effectively. I don't know if they've literally been handed back, but in theory it's literally come to the end of their tenure.
Well, technically it's a door code, isn't it? Oh no, there's a padlock on it sometimes as well.
So we as the mill are picking that space back up, and there's various things that have been programmed, like Vat Out Fest and I think some Rojack projects. So we've wanted to kind of honour and keep those going. We as the mill don't think we want to run a club, as in a programmed club. And the type of thing that the HomoBloc project was talking about in terms of giving people a chance to develop new ideas is the kind of thing we would like to do. So it seems to make sense, and we ran it by the people that came to the last meeting to move the HomoBloc project into what was the club. So there's some advantages to that because it's ground floor.
That's true,
it's a little bit more accessible for people to come in and literally find it and get to it. It's not up some stairs and around in a space people have never been to. People are familiar with it. Maybe some disadvantages. It's not as bright. It's a bit darker and dingier, but we've got some thoughts about that. But it's also licensed, so it does mean that while we're not intending to run a club and we're not asking the HomoBloc project to run a club, that some events that come out of that, rather than waiting for HomoBloc, if some of the artists that come in and do some stuff want to try something out, or even just invite their mates over and have some beers, that's all kind of legal, above board and possible. And a sound system.
That sounds cool. That's it. Ideally, how would you like to see the space being used, or is there anything in particular that you'd be excited to see happening in there?
I mean, I think that space, it's always had such an energy as a club, and for me, when it was a club, I always loved the after club bits, the bits that happened once the main night, just because that's when I could relax.
Yeah.
But I also liked it when it feels like home and people are rehearsing in there, and I think if people can begin to feel like that's a base and a place that's happening during the day, and that people are hanging out in there, and that those days turn into nights, and that impromptu little events and parties come out of that, that's what I'd love to see and feel part of. Like, you know, I love it when I'm in the courtyard and someone's just like, oh, why don't you come in? I've just done this, whatever. And you go in and you hear something amazing, or you see a rehearsal, and it's just like, I feel really privileged to have had that sneak peek at something like in development or emerging, and then to see it then actually on the same stage is even more exciting. And we are going to be having some alternative Pride events there this year over the course of Pride weekend. Yes, one of which will be Bummer Camp, the return of the infamous Bummer Camp. But I'll do another podcast episode about that, because that's got a whole history, cultural history that I want to go into. Any final thoughts? No, I just look forward to meeting everybody, meeting new people, meeting old people. Friends old and new.
We are the old people now, Bill.
We are.
That's the thing. Okay. We are the old people now. Yeah. And that was Bill Campbell, the founder of Islington Mill, talking about his involvement in and vision for the HomoMill project that is currently taking over Islington Mill's club space. The next people I spoke to about this project were HomoBloc's own Rod Connolly and Sophie B, who I met up with in the club space itself to talk about their vision for this project. And you'll be able to hear the audible reverb difference because we were in the big club space. Take it away. Well, listeners, as you can probably hear from the lovely reverb we've got going on, we're not in the studio anymore. We are in the Islington Mill Club space with Rod and Sophie from HomoBloc. How are you guys doing?
Hi, Niall.
Hello, Niall.
Very well, thank you. It's Friday afternoon, the sun...
It's Thursday.
It's
Friday.
Thursday.
Today's
Friday. Is it Friday?
Today's Friday.
Friday.
Oh my God, where did that day go?
Lots
We're
track
busy.
of time,
Yeah, it's a timeless day.
Yeah, it's a timeless day. Can you guys tell me then, what are your roles within HomoBloc?
Off you go, Rob. Off you go,
Yeah, so I am the booker and maybe the protagonist of HomoBloc.
Oh, okay.
I've been part of HomoBloc since its inception in 2019, and I've been part of each party, and then last year I came in to be the programmer, the booker, working with Sophie on the aesthetic and the feel and how it looks. Like booker of HomoBloc, I think would sit underneath my email address. I'm also a promoter. I've developed HomoBloc away from just a day-long festival. I now run HomoBloc present shows all year round in different size venues in the city of Manchester. I did a great show with Fever Ray at Albert Hall. Got some beautiful shows.
Amazing.
It was incredible. Like best show of this year so far. Couple of small shows with Toki Horror at the Star and Garter, Douglas Dare coming up at Yes, Come Girl 8, Babe Ryan at the Deaf Institute. So really looking to extend the brand of HomoBloc and the feel of that by supporting emerging LGBTQ musicians in their Manchester gigs.
And just for full transparency, what's your background, Rod?
My background is club promotion and live music booking.
Sure, but there's a name we're waiting for you to drop right now. What is it?
The promoter of Bollocks, which is a queer party that's been like part of Manchester's rich clubbing legacy and is currently on ice, being preserved for who knows.
It's getting a little bit of a summer outing, though.
Yeah, it's going to.
We can talk about that another time. There'll be another podcast about that. I just wanted to get the Bollocks reference in there because that's like one of the most iconic queer nights that Manchester's ever had, in my opinion, and I just wanted to let the listeners know that you are the force behind Bollocks.
Of course, and I feel like that spirit and force of Bollocks is is going to be felt in everything I do with HomoBloc.
Sure.
You know, I stink of all that stuff. So
You stink of bollocks.
I stink of bollocks.
And we all feel the bollocks every time you enter the room, Rod.
We've all
feel
held them at some point. Right?
Yes, we like to hold the bollocks and support them. Yeah. And as for you, Sophie, what's
So I was brought in the first year of HomoBloc. So I suppose I'm one of the founding members of the performance aspect. And previously to this, I was one of the founders of Albert Schloss. And as part of that, and as part of my journey a long, long time ago, over 20 years ago, I studied visual art and performance, and I became aware of Islington Mill, and then we went on to have studios here. And so my background really is a lot in like the free party and rave scene and clubbing scene and working on a lot of festival work, a lot of performance work for various different festivals. So another part of my role is that I work on for people like Elro and things like that. Okay. So large scale puppets and performance, and then also I work for Block 9 at Glastonbury. Okay. So my role at HomoBloc from the beginning has been performance and bringing in the performative element, and that's now changed to where I'm at, which is like creative director. So I work alongside Rod, and we've kind of gone from the first HomoBloc where we were like, every queer performance artist in the world, this is our time, this is our global stage, to now sort of refining that. And as those artists, 5 years ago, some of them were at the beginning of their career, or they were like moving into a much more honed and style, like the Foot Pigs is a really good example. And now they are there in their own entity. So we now my role a lot more is to work with a lot of the artists and DJs individually to draw out what they feel like the performative element of their performance should be, and then we work with collectives to do that. So it's a lot less like every man, dog, person in the world on stage, to a lot more like honed and choreographed. Still with lots of walkabout and hidden pockets of excitement. Sure. And I work a lot with the visuals and the sound team to create bespoke pieces that happen throughout the festival. And I get to work with Rod, which is the best bit.
And I think like a really beautiful thing is both Sophie and I have come from like a DIY club scene and art scene, and for us to be holding these positions is like incredible because we're bringing everyone with us. That's the kind of the thing. It's like
I think we're consciousness of the gatekeepers that perhaps held positions before us, and one of the things that we try to do every year is for everybody to have more involvement and more, producers that we now work with that help produce the main stage were originally go-go dancers. So it's like, if you want to step up, if you want to be more involved, then you can.
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened to us. I came in with an art installation for the first one, and here I am, like, looking at every single artist you're going to see and hear. Yeah. It's come through me. It's like, wow, what a journey.
And not telling me who they are.
No, you you'll get the unveil, which will be a week on Tuesday.
I feel like I want you to wear a veil all day in the office until it happens, and then we can unveil you, and you can have a beer, a well-deserved beer after all that time.
Hazeldine and Sonia back to back. There's the exclusive reveal.
Manchester Pride are quaking in their boots. Right, so we're here in the Islington Mill club space. Can you tell me about the project that's happening here?
So everybody from kind of the Northwest Collective, and especially not everyone from our queer community, but a lot of people have been through the Mill at some point. And the Mill is this really wonderful space that's a very safe space and a lot of fun, and we've made a lot of fun here. So when we were looking at our charity partnerships for the next year after last year, it just seemed to make a lot of sense for us to be able to put back into our community, our DIY background community, and to support up and coming promoters and also our individual artists. And the Mill seemed like a really good place for us to start that conversation.
Yeah, the Mill, like both Sophie and I have felt like we've come from the Mill in its guises over the past 25 years, I believe.
It's 25 years.
So we've all had our kind of moments and learned a lot and powered ourselves through here and made loads of connections. And we were like, what community space could this chunk of money that HomoBloc raised benefit from? And it was quite quickly that we were like, it's a fucking mill. It's the mill.
It's the mill, and also I think the mill's gone through a lot of transitions post-COVID. And obviously since Fat Out have left, well, it was a club space for 2 years, and before that it had been used as a multi-purpose space when Jane was here, obviously, and Riv.
And you can find out all this history on these Islington Mill podcasts.
Definitely.
Just shout out to myself.
But it's such an important, iconic, experimental space. I think that's what's really important. Like, it's experimental, and that's like some of the gigs I've watched Bjork DJ here dressed as a lobster. I've watched a 9-hour DIY post-industrial punk soundscape. I've watched the amount of gigs that we've been to here over the years, but there's been a bit of a gap post-COVID, and I feel like the mill needed some support with that, and we've been able to help with that.
Can I just dial back? And Rod, you mentioned the fund. Can you just explain what that is?
Absolutely, yeah. So HomoBloc each year raises money for charities, and in the 2023 window we had 4 charity partners, and that was the George House Trust, LGBT Foundation, Gendered Intelligence, and the Islington Mill Foundation. So that's what we're talking about here, the money that's been donated to the Islington Mill Foundation.
Right.
And that foundation is to support kind of the continual development of the mill's inhabitants, but also external people coming into it. So it's like a community fund, and it's still very new. So I think this is the first pot of money that it's received. So they're kind of like together. We're like, how do we spend this money? Like, what's the best way of spending it?
And we also feel like with the festival, with HomoBloc, it's great because this thing is on the calendar now and it happens every year. But there's a lot of pre-work that happens, and currently we've been doing that like anywhere that we can. And obviously because Mayfield Depot is a hired space, it's not HomoBloc's full-time home, and it's not even the warehouse project's full-time home. It's a hired space. So for us to do rehearsals, or for us to do dance workshops or makeup workshops, or lots of different nuances, hold meetings, hold talking circles, planning circles. So in order to do that, we've had to find space to do it, and we have used the mill a few times, and by injecting some money into the mill, it therefore means that we have a space within the mill whereby all of those things can happen.
Yeah, and this is very much a work in progress, and we'll talk about how the mill is experimental. This is an experimental project. We're not, this isn't HomoBloc space. HomoBloc's donated money to the Islington Mill Foundation, who want to keep the basis. This room doesn't really have a name. Islington Mill is, for me and my experience of the mill, the room we're in, which listeners might recognise as the live room, or the room where the clubs are. Yeah.
Previous to this, it was Partisan, who've left now.
And previous to that, it was the Borough.
And Makers Market.
Makers
Market as well.
Yeah,
when that was, it didn't have a club license then. It was a
workshop.
A workshop space, a working space with stalls. And
then previously that, it was just Islington Mill and known as the club space.
And previous to that, apparently, it was full of old sound desks and lots of rubbish furniture that had to get moved out 25 years ago.
It's obviously famous for sounds from the other city every year.
Absolutely,
and
Shout out to sounds.
Where a lot of the performance artists that we work with were born, essentially, I think.
So what is the kernel idea of what you'd like to get out of this space?
It's a really good question, and it's a question that we're asking ourselves, but also we've had some what we've called HomoBloc mixers, where we've invited creatives who have been in touch with us around wanting to get involved with HomoBloc a little bit more, or wanting to have a space where they can work as artists and collaborate and cohabit with other people. So we've had a series of meetings and mixers, and it's led us to sort of like have this space for a window of time, which I believe is August until probably the end of this year. So we're going to have maybe a 4-month window where this space can be used for whatever the fuck people want it to be.
Yeah.
So it could be self-defense classes for people working in the nightlife industries, like get yourself protected. It could be cinema nights, it could be gigs, clubs, dance rehearsal studios. It could just be a sober, clear space. We just want to come and meet, and we know that this is going to be a safe hangout space. So it can be whatever it wants to be, and we're kind of, Sophie and I, and know the mill as well, we're not trying to say this is how this space is going to be. We're using this space just as everybody else. We're booking it out to do our things.
And I think for me as well, it's just a meeting space. Like that's one of the beauties of the mill and the beauties of DIY spaces. I think if a space can just hold space for people, and by what I mean that is like, if it's just there so people can come and sit and be in it and start those conversations, like who knows where those conversations can go, whether that be a performative piece that happens this year at HomoBloc or 5 years at HomoBloc, or whether it's just gives somebody like a conversation that then gets them to meet someone else and then they can go and help their creative practice. We just feel like a lot of other people within our community that we needed a space within the city where we can start these conversations.
Sure, yeah.
And also from the club space and live space perspective, because Rod and I are here, we want to then offer back as well within our experience. So we've held some conversations with up and coming promoters and been able to help them with like budgets and promotion skills. And so that's another really important part of us being here, is that we can all share our experiences with each other and learn from them.
Sure. And just to round it off, if anybody hearing this wants to get involved, how's the best way of doing that?
It's a very good question, actually, because I don't believe there's been an infrastructure. It's still a work in progress.
Sure. Okay.
So I think there's a TBC on that, and perhaps
an email.
Once we've had this conversation, there might be a slight edit where you're able to add at the end, like what that communication level will be. But I imagine there'll be an email. We have got an active WhatsApp group community.
People can get in touch through our Instagram. So if this is something that you're interested in being part of, you're a performance artist or you're an artist or a DJ or whatever those realms are, and you're like, I want to connect with that community, then I think probably the easiest way straight away would be through Instagram.
Okay, that's
where you can just direct message us.
Yeah, I do understand that it's still coming together and stuff's being ironed out, but just because I think this is going to go up pretty soon, so just where people can go is the Instagram
direct message is an instant way to contact us.
Cool.
And that's just hashtag HomoBloc or at HomoBloc.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. The future sounds very bright.
Exciting.
Is it Thursday?
It's Friday.
That Friday feeling. And there you have it, the lowdown on the HomoMill project that is taking over Islington Mill's club space. Even though it's very, very early days at this point, it's only been, how many days into August are we? We're 3 days into August. And the project only officially started in the club space on the 1st of August. So yeah, it's very, very early doors yet. But if anybody wants to get involved who's listening to the podcast now, like Rod said and Sophie said at the end of their little segment, go to the HomoBloc Instagram and there'll be more information on there about what they're doing, but also if there's anybody in particular who wants to get in touch who would like to use the club space. All the information should be on, or as much information as is available so far, should be on the HomoBloc Instagram page. Again, like I said, very, very early doors for this project right now. I just thought it was important to get some information out about it at this stage so people know what's going on. But the future does seem bright, but who knows? It's yet to basically take its legs and to start running. So we'll see how that goes when it does. But I'm sure that most people around the Islington Mill community are very excited to have the club space still operating. And with that in mind, I'm going to do another podcast this month. Like I said at the start of this podcast, even though it's coming out in August, this is the backdated to July podcast because I've been having a little bit of a summer break from podcasting. But the next podcast episode, which will arrive before the end of this month, is going to be a trip down a bit of history, a tour down a memory lane for some of the people at Islington Mill community, where I'm going to be covering with my partner and with some of the other people involved, including hopefully Riv Burns and Bill Campbell, if they're both available at the same time, the history of an event called Bummer Camp. Because this Pride at the the bank holiday weekend coming towards the end of this month of August, there is going to be the return of Bummer Camp to Islington Mill. And yes, it will be happening, of course, in the Islington Mill club space with some very special guests and some very exciting lineup to be announced for that. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Information will be going up on the usual Instagrams, on the Islington Mill Instagram, and my own personal Instagram. You can find me at _nihilist_AKA. That's THE_NIALLIST_AKA. I might have changed it by the time this comes out, but probably not. But you can find me on Instagram there. Blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Like and subscribe. Da, 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 da. I'll be back, like I said, before the end of this month with another podcast about the history of an event called Bummer Camp. And until that point, smell you laters.